I haven't really explained how the development of this radioimmunoassay happened. At the time, it's a very small molecule, melatonin, and received opinion was that it was hard, if not impossible, to actually develop a radioimmunoassay for such a molecule. But with the experience of the paediatric clinic, we set off and we developed the antibody which was needed. And then we needed to make a radioactive form of melatonin. And that was one of my major memories of this time, because I did the synthesis myself using tritiated acetyl-CoA. And when I finished the synthesis, I put it into our old radiation counter, and which had a switch to count gamma radiation, which you turned in the other direction to count beta radiation. And I hadn't noticed that it was tritiated melatonin, therefore beta radiation. The switch was on gamma, and I put my sample in. There was nothing there, and I thought, oh, I've wasted 6 months of my life making nothing. And then I realized it was on gamma and turned it over to beta radiation measurement, and wow, there it was. It was the first ever radioactive melatonin, and in order to use it to measure the stuff, we had to count every sample 50 minutes because it wasn't very radioactive. These days you count every sample a minute or two, and if you're lucky you've got a gamma radiation label of iodine usually. But in those days it was enough to get the assay up and working and to start looking at melatonin in humans, which had not been done properly except on one occasion by a group at MIT. Harry Lynch was the first author, Richard Workman was one of the co-authors. They had used the bioassay to measure melatonin in humans, and they had shown a rhythm. So it did actually help in that it also gave us an idea of the sensitivity that we needed for this measurement technique. Okay, well, now that we had this measurement technique up, of course the world is your oyster, and it's a matter of choosing the most interesting roads to follow, and I'm afraid I chose several. And one of them was collaboration with psychiatrists, and particularly those interested in winter depression. So we collaborated with the Swedish psychiatrist Lennart Wetterberg, who also facilitated the development of an even better antibody for performing this radioimmunoassay through the company called KB. He did an enormous amount of work also on his own account, but we looked at a variety of things with him. One of the things that he looked at was whether light would suppress melatonin, and in one person it looks as though he could show that it did, whereas I didn't use enough room light to show significant suppression of melatonin at that time. It was only later that we knew that we needed 2000 lux from Al Louis' famous experiment in order to suppress melatonin completely. Actually, it's quite surprising that room light didn't suppress melatonin at all, because it is sufficient to change it, according to the most sensitive recent techniques. And then continuing the psychiatric connection, one of my friends and collaborators in Geneva was Professor Anna Wirtz-Justice. She and I found a mutual interest in rhythms at a conference, as it happens, as so often happens. And we looked at daily and particularly a seasonal rhythm in melatonin and other indoles, and we were so naive at that time that we did it on a single sample in 24 hours, and we all know now that that is totally inadequate for measuring a seasonal rhythm. But we did try. And we took our data to a rhythms conference in the Italian town of Pavia. And it just luckily happened that two very important people in the American rhythms field were at that conference. One was a chap called Dan Kripke, who is still very much around and doing things, and the other was Tom Weir at NIH, who was very interested in rhythms and psychiatry and light, and who worked with Norman Rosenthal and with Al Lewy. So there was the meeting of the people all interested from different directions in depression, winter depression, rhythms, humans, and melatonin. At the same time, and which enhanced the importance of melatonin, we knew from David Klein's work with Bob Moore and Joan Weller that if you took the central clock out of the brain of a rat, say, it's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, if you lesioned it, you lost the rhythm of melatonin. And Moore and Klein and their colleagues mapped the pathway whereby the central clock drives the melatonin rhythm, this is all in rats, and light synchronizes it to 24 hours in a normal light-dark cycle. And Helena Ilnerova showed that as little as a minute of light at night would suppress melatonin. But the fact that this hormone's rhythm is driven by the central clock, and that it can be measured in the pineal itself, its synthesis, in the blood, in saliva, and its metabolite in urine, and that all of those profiles of this hormone reflect the activity in the central clock, means that it is essentially a marker of the internal rhythmic circadian status of a human being. And it has been enormously important in that respect throughout the whole field of rhythms research. I think we probably did a definitive experiment in the 70s. We took rats every hour during the night, and we measured melatonin in their blood. We measured the melatonin enzyme, N-acetyltransferase, in their pineal glands, and we measured melatonin itself in their pineal glands. And all three sites showed a highly related rhythm, such that any one of them could be used as a measure of the central circadian clock activity. And later on, we were to show that the melatonin metabolite in blood and in urine, and notably in urine, because it's so useful, was also a very good reflection of what is going on actually in your brain. It's a kind of window on the brain.